Hey, good afternoon, or should I say good evening, everyone. It's me, Nisi, back to do a short reading. I'm going to try to make this one a short one tonight. Over on Facebook yesterday at my lunch break, I was talking about a book that I was currently reading. It's called The Medical Apartheid, The Dark History of Medical Experimentation on Black Americans from Colonial Times to Present. It's by Henriette A. Washington. Henriette. Okay, not Henrietta, but Henriette. Okay. I want to read a couple of things to you. Not going to read the whole introduction. I just want to point out some key things. And we're going to get into this. Okay. I may just come back and read. I'm going to do the introduction, just some paragraphs over. And then as I get further into the book, I may come back and read some other things to you all. But you got to know that this has been going on for a very long time, since after the fall of Tartary. Right. There was always medical testing, medical experiments, genome splicing. If you read the Sumerian text, the Sumerian tablets, you'll know that. Okay. And you'll know that there were entities or beings that came from other domes or planets. All right. Other dome or cellular membranes that came here into these known lands. And they've always been here with us. Right. They've always been here, and you just have to do your research, and you have to understand that, what we've been taught is, as I always say, it's the furthest from the truth. It really is. It really is. You really just got to do your research. So genetic splicing and genomes, genetic splicing and using the DNA and things like that has always gone on. Okay. And this is before the human race, the human avatar body was created. All right. So, all right, Mojo, go lay down. So she talks about how these atrocities have taken place since the colonial times into present, and still goes on. Right. But I just wanted to preface this by saying that there's nothing new under the sun. Right. There were med beds thousands of years ago, and now they're coming out with so-called quote unquote technology. These beings are well beyond advanced of our technology, and we're just now stepping into that world, right? They've had to bring us along gradually. Okay. So in course of her writing this book, she talks about how she reached out to Pfizer Inc. I'm just going to read this to you. She says, I wanted to reproduce Tom's painting on the cover of this book, or at least in text. But when I asked permission of its copyright holder, Pfizer Inc., the company insisted on reviewing the entire manuscript of this book before making a decision. As an independent scholar, I could not acquiesce to this and used another cover image. When I renewed my request to use the image without the text, Pfizer agreed to base its decision upon reading this chapter, and an outline of the book. Pfizer executives apparently were uncomfortable with what they read because they refused to grant permission to reproduce this telling image or even respond to my query after I supplied the requested chapter and outline. This act of censorship exemplifies the barrier some choose to erect in order to veil the history of the unconscionable medical research with so-called blacks. Now, in this book, the author does, quote unquote, use the crayon color term black, and the author does use the quote unquote term African American. Well, we know we're not black, and we know we're not African American here. If you're a Negro, you're American Indian. That's just it. It's in the Library of Congress. You can go look that shit up. I'm just saying, you can't make this stuff up. I found that funny, interesting, ironic that they wouldn't support this. And of course, this is for entertainment purposes only. And, you have to do your research. Don't take my word for anything that I'm reading. You go do your research, right? I'm just sharing some information I find very interesting. All right. So then here, I'm going to skip down to another part of this introduction, which I found just like, wow. Yeah. This is a very disturbing book. And this brings us to the subject of this book, which documents a peculiar type of injustice in health, the troubled history of medical experimentation with, quote unquote, she has African Americans, I crossed it out, put American Indians, and the resulting behavior fallout that causes researchers and American Indians to view each other through jaundiced eyes. In his 1909 preface, The Doctor's Dilemma, George Bernard Shaw scathingly observed, "The tragedy of illness at present is that it delivers you helplessly into the hands of a profession which you deeply mistrust." He could have been speaking for contemporary American Indians, because studies and surveys repeatedly confirm that no other group as deeply mistrusts the American medical system, especially medical research. And I put in pink letters, true. The problem is growing. As the Wall Street Journal observed several years back, it hasn't been a good time for scientists who experiment on people or the people they experiment on. This is a masterpiece of an understatement, especially if you consider the recent history of the medical research with so-called American Indians, aka they call us African American. We know we're not. The Office for Protection for Research Risk, OPRR, has been busily investigating abuses at more than 60 research centers, including experimentation-related deaths at premier universities from Columbia to California. Another important subset of human subject abuse has been scientific fraud, wherein scientists from the University of South Carolina to MIT have been found to have lied through falsified data and fictitious research agendas, often in service of research that abused so-called, quote-unquote, crayon colors, Black Americans. Within recent years, the OPRR has also suspended the research at such revered universities as Alabama, Pennsylvania, Duke, Yale, and Johns Hopkins. Many studies enrolled only or principally African Americans, although some included a smattering of Hispanics. Some research studies specifically exclude white subjects. Okay, we know there's no such thing as white, but I'm reading it verbatim in this book. Excluded white subjects according to the terms of their official protocols, the federally required plans that detail how research studies are conducted. However, in other human medical experiments, the recruitment of Blacks and the poor is a tacit feature of the study because they recruit subjects from heavily Black inner city areas that tend to surround American teaching hospitals. American university research centers have historically been located in inner city areas, and accordingly, a disproportionate number of these abuses have involved experiments with African Americans. These subjects were given experimental vaccines known to unacceptably high lethality, were enrolled in experiments without consent or knowledge, were subjected to surreptitious surgical and medical procedures while unconscious, injected with toxic substances, deliberately monitored rather than treated for deadly ailments, excluded from life-saving treatments, or secretly farmed for sera or tissues that were used to perfect technologies such as infectious diseases. A few African American medical institutions have suffered their own run-ins with federal oversight agencies concerned about how they treated their own research subjects. So you see, it's not just the pale skins or the light skins, because, I don't say white. It's not just the pale skins. Our own kind have been doing it to us. All skin folk and kin folk. That's all I'm going to say. So it says, but the considerable concern raised by governmental oversight agencies has been dwarfed by the periodic hue and cry raised in the popular press. The news media seize upon and decry new experimental abuses with regularity. Moreover, it is newspapers, not research oversight organizations, that have been instrumental in unveiling and in ending egregious abuses, from the Tuskegee syphilis study to the Tuskegee syphilis study in the 1970s to 1996 jailing of poor Black mothers who were unwittingly research subjects in South Carolina, to the 1998 infusion of poor Black New York City boys with cardiotoxic drug fenfurmiline. However, newspapers and magazines have given such abuses episodic rather than an analytic treatment, expending their outrage, then falling silent until the next wave of research deaths, missing consent forms, or unwittingly subjects still headlines. So see, it's only popular for a short period of time. They want to grab readers and be promoted and have a following, then they're going to write about it. But if it's not a popular thing, because I know that these newspapers and these media outlets are all owned by 4 corporations? Is it 4 or 6? So they're all in cahoots with each other. Like literally, if you want to keep your job, you're going to write about what they tell you to write about. You're not going to be able to cover content worthy stuff, right? And it's not a popular opinion, so they're not going to get, and I dare say they'll get a little bit of press, but it won't be a lot. That's the truth. My chihuahuas hit me on my leg. You want to get up here on camera anyway? So it says, subjects are often identified not as Black, but using coded references as urban poor, socioeconomically disadvantaged, or inner city residents. The episodic approach treats the exploitation of Black experimental subjects in isolated events, so that even while the repeated reports buttress widespread distrust of medical research, these stories fail to discern the stubborn and illuminating patterns characterized by the medical abuse of so-called Black or African Americans. Okay. It says, in fact, the news media often fail to perceive unethical experimentation, even as they write about it. Scientists promulgate novel drugs and technologies such as Norplant use among adolescents and psychosurgery for writers as new therapies that are necessarily extreme remedies. But despite the treatment's untried nature and the vulnerability of their subjects, the news media often swallow such euphemistic labels as breakthrough and new therapy. Research is utterly essential and desirable component of treatment, but its subjects must be aware that they are participating, must be informed, must consent, and must be allowed to weigh the possible risks and benefits. As this book will show, these conditions are only haphazardly met or not at all when the subjects are my hue, American Indian, but she says African American, right? So, I just could not even get here. So it says, attempts to understand the distrust this history generates are confused and distorted because few know its facts beyond a few often cited experimental outrages, notably the Tuskegee syphilis study, history of the medicine courses, medical museums, and even more medical scholarship leave one aware of the long, tragic history of medical research with African Americans. There are fine books that address more general issues in the history of African American medicine. These include the history of the Negro in medicine, making a place for ourselves. Another one's called An American Health Dilemma. Other works deal with discrete instances of African American experimental exploitation, such as James Jones' Bad Blood, and Susan M. Revery's Tuskegee Truths, the Plutonium Files, and that talks about, from Ellen Weissman, meticulously details government radiation experiments in a gripping expose, Bones in the Basement, by Robert Blakey and Judith Harrington. Documents that have archaeological evidence that reveal how the Medical College of Georgia used stolen African American bodies for physicians training. Alan Horblum's Acres of Skin chronicles experimentation in Philadelphia's Homburg's prison complex, and the treatment by Martha Stevens does the same with Cincinnati's radiation experiments. Most of the abuses detailed in these books targeted African Americans. Killing the Black Body, that's another good one that I have over here, by Dorothy Roberts, includes research in its examination of the reproductive constraints on African American women in historical context. And we have another one that's called Working Cures and Medicine and Slavery, are some phenomenal histories of the antebellum medicine that discuss research issues, but not exclusively. There's another book. A few scholars have devoted books to research with Blacks abroad, such as Clarence Lucine's Find Hitler's Black Victims, Okay. And then there's another one that's called Medicine and Colonial Imperialists on Medical Colonialism in German's African Holdings, and also the heroes of German medical abuse. Okay. So there's multiple books out there that talk about this thing, right? But she's done a collective expose in here. So another part of my drop down and say why history is written by the victors. Let me go back. But none of these works lifted above attempts anything like the comprehensive history of the racial research wars. They have been no inclusive treatments of African American medical research and only a few books on discrete aspects of that history, focusing on research in a single prison, a single archaeological discovery of African American bones in a medical school basement, a single experiment within the syphilitic men, or a single radiation experiment. Why? History is written by the victors, warned Churchill, and a Nigerian proverb issued a similar caveat. Don't let the lion tell the giraffe's story. The history of medicine has been written by the medical professionals and so reflects their points of view. The experimental suffering of so-called Black Americans has taken many forms: fear, profound deception, psychological trauma, pain, injection with deadly agents, disfigurement, crippling, chronic illness, undignified display, intractable pain, stolen fertility, and death. None reflect well upon their medical practitioners, so this experimental abuse often has been downplayed or misrepresented as quote unquote therapy in the medical and popular literature. I'm going to just stop it right there and just say this little nod. There are so many people that come up missing. David Paulides, go check him out. Can-Am Missing 411 Project. I share a lot of stuff over here on YouTube as well as over on Facebook. And there's a lot of people that come up missing in national parks. There are a lot of people that come up missing, period. If you know that when you go out there and you look at the missing persons registry, you will see a lot more people of color. Now, I'm not going to say that it's a disparaging amount of people regardless, but there was a time where you could see that there were a lot of kidnappings and missing people with Black women, okay, with so-called quote unquote melanated women. It's the melanin in our skin. Okay, I'm just going to tell you, I'm going to be straight up. And our reproductive and our structure is our DNA is different. I'm just going to tell you like that. Especially the O positive people. They are the original people of this dome. They were manifested, created, whatever you want to say. First and foremost, that's the template. That's the blueprint. And God forbid we wake up and we discover the true and the inner power that we possess within each of us. That's why they work so hard. That's why they got these cell phone towers up that are military grade weaponry. That's why they spray the skies constantly with all the heavy metals, the PFAS in the water, the GMO food. They push the pharmaceuticals. Every time you turn on the TV and you're looking at something, a commercial come on. Just like I heard through people, because I didn't watch the Super Bowl, but every other commercial was damn pharmaceutical company. So you know who runs everything. The corporations, capitalism runs this United States corporation. And put it that way. The corporations run the corporations and they have a vote in it. And so my point is that there's been a lot of people that have come up missing, especially melanated people. And you got to know that the children are being taken, and y'all know about the adrenochrome. Y'all know about them scaring the children and then, getting them to a state of high sense of fear, and then they drain them, and they utilize the blood. And there's no fact checking here. That's a freaking fact. That's a fact. Anybody could go look that up. There's no conspiracy. I mean, it's not. It's out now. I mean, everybody should know this stuff, right? Everybody should know this stuff is actual real. It's not a conspiracy theory. See, my thing is the difference between a conspiracy and the truth is time, is months, right? Because you all say, oh, that's a conspiracy. But then you come to find out, no, it's the truth. So be that as it may, my family has actually experienced that. My two aunts had some type of surgery done where they couldn't have children. They took their uteruses. They couldn't have kids. They did an early experimentation on them in the early 1900s, right after the fall of Tartary, right? And they were doing the reconstruction here in the Americas. And you had a lot of our men out fighting. And what happened? Women and children were here. though some of the women did fight early on, but, you know, it only takes one generation, perhaps two, to change the whole dynamic. And they had to come in and they had to, you know, set up these Indian training camps where we taught these people how to be us. And then they took over from there with the government with this $5 Indian Dolls Act. And, you know, that's a fact. I don't care how you feel. The Mongoloid people came over through the Bering Straits, however you want to call it. And they're only 56 miles from Russia. So these people, these beings, these different races, they don't know their history. They don't. And dare say, majority of them won't even go take the time to research. They'll call it poppycock and hogwash. I had a conversation with a gentleman through Facebook Messenger, and he was sending me some stuff, and he was telling me that, yeah, you all were created first, but they wanted a more intelligent race, and they wanted a race that could take commands and execute things and be more intelligent and follow orders. And so basically what he was telling me, that the pale skin race was created because they were superior. And I'm not a racist person, so please don't take that as such. I'm just simply saying, when you take something, when you take a blueprint or a copy of something and you make it into something else, that's always going to be an inferior copy. I'm just saying it for what it is. And I'm sorry if I offend someone, but facts are facts. I mean, the original always stands to be the number one key. And that's why this planet or this dome world is in a muck, because we've got entities and things that are walking around here that shouldn't be. I'm just going to say, they were created for a purpose. Yes, but they don't have that inner dialogue or that inner monologue, right? Some of them do have a connection to Mother Earth and Source. I get that. But I'm going to say something else is powering them. Okay. Not what you think. That's all I'm going to say on that. All right. And, you know, I have a lot of pale skinned people in my family. Hell, my grandfather was pale skinned. My great-great-grandfather was pale skinned. So he still is. He's just gone. He's no longer among the living. So, I mean, I have a mixture. I wouldn't be here right now. My mother wouldn't be here right now. So I can't say that. I'm just simply saying to you is that when you start to scratch the surface and then you dig deeper, it's obvious, right? It just takes a person to put that together. Some people have a hard time connecting the dots. My point is, they're still doing experiments under the ground. I shared something over on Facebook and also on YouTube from Lilith and Donovan Dredge's channel. They're talking about military bases under Fort Knox, Fort Bliss. They've got all kinds of experiments, people going in with hoods over their heads. Of course, they have men in black that show up, or some type of military unit that comes in with no insignia or a weird type of insignia. And so you know that they are doing experiments on people. I mean, it's just a bottom line fact. Y'all just got to wake up. Most people got their head in the sand and they don't care unless it directly affects them. So, you know, when you see these dog men and these creatures that are in the national parks that they release, because they've done this, they call them assets. When they release these assets in the park, they were destroying them, quite a few of them. But there are some that got away and that bred in the national parks. And so you've got these beings that have superpowers that can take bullets, that can take heat, and they can take fire, and they can regenerate. I mean, it's really true. They've already mastered the super soldier, you guys. The stuff they got on TV, they've been able to do that now. I mean, that's old technology. But we're thinking it's new stuff that's coming out when they've mastered that. The military industrial complex and DARPA, they're all in on that shit. I'm just telling you. It's way beyond what we could ever fathom, is what I'm telling you. And the basis of this starts from that period in time of the fall of Tartary, and probably way before then. I'm just going to say it, you know. So it says, the slave appropriated by physicians for experimental surgeries, the impoverished clinic patient operated upon to devise or demonstrate a surgical technique, the sharecropper whose body is spirited from the morgue for dissection, the young girl whose fertility is stolen via an untested contraceptive technique, or the Mississippi appendectomy, which is an involuntary sterilization, right? And that's what happened to my aunts, one of the sets of twins. The soldiers, prisoners, and children who find themselves without options when government physicians foist novel medications and techniques upon those with little legal protection. All these African Americans and many more have found themselves voiceless as medical lions have chosen to present this research in a battlerized manner. The oral histories of medical abuse voiced by African Americans are often dismissed as mythological, but without objective proof of this label. African Americans' personal stories and familiar histories of abuse have rarely surfaced in the medical literature or in popular literature. This is not surprising because African Americans were not well represented in these canons until fairly recently. Why should we give the physicians' medical narratives more credence than the numerous contentions of slaves? We weren't slaves, we were prisoners of war. So there's the indoctrination. Okay, so you got to dodge the hijack. Contentions of prisoners of war, sharecroppers, and contemporary African Americans that have been subjected to abusive medical research. Until now, the discussion has suffered greatly from our Western literary biases, which encourages us to believe planners and physicians' writings about the health and medical issues of African Americans, but to give insignificant weight to a rich oral history passed down by African Americans, a history that has preserved the memory of medical abuses. We quite logically cede medical authority to medical experts, but this book will illustrate how race, culture, and economics have trumped medical and scientific truths at every turn. It will make the case that physicians had every motive to skew narratives against their Black subjects, quote unquote, crayon colors, not because they were especially racist or unfair, although many were, but because the culture of American medicine has mirrored the larger culture that encompassed enslavement, segregation, and less dramatic forms of racial inequity. The bias against African American medical narratives emanates from cultural politics, including the Western literary bias against oral history. Because prisoners of war were forbidden to read and segregated educational institutions perpetuated illiteracy and undereducation, Black Americans' contributions to historical understanding of their role in American medicine was dwarfed or silenced. Finally, physician accounts carefully inoculated beliefs about Black fearfulness, credulous emotional instability, and a tendency towards falsehoods that help to discount claims of abuse. The resulting in American history, medical history, feel erroneously assumptions about Blacks' medical weariness. An almost insane innate resistance to all medical research is ascribed to all African Americans. Often the fear of becoming an abused, unwittingly subject is led to one signal instance of abuse, the Tuskegee syphilis study, rather than the centuries-long history of such abuse. So basically, let me read this part. Fortunately, the facts recorded by researchers and scientists themselves in medical journals, text speeches, and memoirs buttress African American claims for several reasons. Until 3 or 4 decades ago, these researchers were speaking only to their like-minded peers, other so-called whites, okay, usually male and rarely of low class. They could afford to be frank. Blacks were barred from medical schools and training programs. Newspaper and magazine reporters rarely read the medical publications pursued by or perused by specifically trained medical men of means. And if you go look up the inventions and things like that, we basically taught everything. We actually invented the majority of things that you utilize today. And that's not throwing around a race card. That's a damn fact. And if you would just, my pale skinned brothers and sisters, go do your research. You don't have to take my word for it. Start looking the shit up yourself. I have plenty of pale skinned friends and family members who know this already. I mean, they don't really talk about it and bring it up, but they know it. They know it's the truth. And so we had to teach basically those coming off the boat that were coming over from released from Scottish prisons, English prisons, Ireland, all these different places coming over. They sent the worst of the worst over here. And they told them, if you get on this boat, get off the boat, we're going to give you a weapon. If you kill these darkies, you can have their land. You can have a new life. And that's the truth. And that's not what's taught. We're taught reverse, that we came over on a ship and we were slaves. Oh, there's ships. Yeah, there are ships. And there were some slaves that came over from Africa. But the majority of us were already here. Why would you financially? It does not make sense as business, not personal, but financially. If you got a bunch of people that are walking around that look like the people you bringing over on the ship, wouldn't it behoove you to steal these people and take these people and get rid of these people and eliminate these people as much as possible by shipping their ass somewhere else? Instead of bringing them over, at a point in period of time, they wouldn't take in no more imports, if you want to call it that. They weren't letting no immigrants come in here. Look it up. It's in Jamil's book. They stopped all this shit because there was too many people here. Benjamin Franklin even said in his memoirs, and it's in the Library of Congress. Well, he talked about that this continent is all pretty much Negro. It's all dark skins, melanated people. They look like the people over in the other continents. You know, there's very few pale-skinned people walking around. There's majority Negro. To be white back then was like rare. I'm just saying. Y'all got to snap about your coma. I'm not trying to pick on anybody or anything like that, but y'all got to know this stuff. Y'all went to college. Y'all graduated with degrees. Y'all don't know this shit? I mean, come on. Y'all just going by the narrative that they gave you. See, that's the problem. That's what's wrong with this world. You're dependent on those in control to tell you what's what. The critical thinking and logical thinking is out the window. All right, let's finish this up. I don't want to go too much longer. So it says we were never supposed to read. So, I mean, they could be frank because they weren't expecting for us to elevate ourselves and come back up where we belong. And I don't want to sound like I'm a racist. I'm just going to simply say it, my light-skinned brothers and sisters. Y'all can't tell our story no more. It's not your place to tell history of what was based on what was wrote by your forefathers, who clearly were influenced by these custodians and AIPAC and the Zionists. I'm just simply saying, y'all can't speak on our story no more. Y'all can give all these theories and these accusations because they've rewrote history. They've changed all the books. They've changed everything. There are still some people here in their 70s, 80s, and 90s who know the truth. Okay. And they have family members and they've told them the truth. All right. The truth of history. Right. Tardier was taught up until like the 1930s, 1940s, I think. 1930s, either the 1920s through the 40s. Okay. I have to look at my notes again, but it was taught up until that time frame. So, I mean, what are we dealing with here? We're dealing with a bunch of people who came over here and rewrote history to serve their purpose and to put themselves in positions of power, all right, and to keep a boot on our neck. I'm just going to simply say it. Well, you know, the truth of the world was primarily all melanated and the pale skin race is fairly new. It makes you feel some kind of way. And I get that. But the truth needs to be known. I'm just going to say that. Yeah, we are all one consciousness and all one being. But we need to set the record straight. Like I said, it's not your story to tell, it's ours. It's the truth, you know? So it says, until 3 or 4 decades ago, these researchers were speaking only to their like-minded peers, other whites, usually male and rarely of lower classes. They could afford to be frank. Blacks were barred from many medical schools and training programs. Newspapers, magazines, reporters rarely read the medical publications perused by specially trained medical men of means. There was very little danger of any blacks would read medical accounts because in the antebellum period, black literacy was banned by law and illiteracy persisted long before slavery. I have a family member who had an education of the second, maybe it was the third grade. And that family member made over $100,000 a year. But that's because he had a drive, he had a dedication to take care of his family. And he put all of his kids through college. He did something that he wasn't able to do, but he did it for his family, right? I'm just simply saying, my aunt Alberta, I remember teaching her how to write. As my grandmother's sister, one of the twins. And when I was learning how to read and write, I would teach her, you know? So it is true. There's some people that grew up and they were illiterate. Therefore, a doctor could be open about buying slaves for experiments or locating or moving hospitals to areas where blacks furnished bodies for experimentation and dissection. Look up that scandal with the Smithsonian. Even though they have a so-called melanated person as a president or a figurehead now. But they've done a lot of devious shit. They've dug up all of our bones all around the world, skeletons of giants. Things have come up missing. They've got bodies of fetuses and embryos and brains and things like that they've been called on upon in a warehouse, right? They've been called out about this shit. They just try to sweep that stuff under the rug. They're a part of the problem. They're a part of the problem. So it says, therefore, a doctor could be open about buying slaves for experiments or locating moving hospitals to areas where blacks furnish bodies for experimentation and dissection. Public health service physician Thomas Muriel could brashly insist in the 1940s. The future of the Negro lies more in the research laboratory than in the schools. See that point? He said that shit in the 1940s. When diseased, he should be registered and forced to take treatment before he offers his diseased mind and body on the altar of academic and professional education. Even more recently, the segregated nature of U.S. medical training emboldened some physicians to speak with candor of misusing black subjects. It was cheaper to use niggers, quote unquote, with the N-word, niggers, than cats because they were everywhere and cheap experimental animals. Neurosurgeon Harry Bailey, M.D., reminisced in a 1960 speech he delivered while at the Tulane Medical School. But as societal attitudes changed, so did physician residents, and most became more circumspect. However, as late in 1995, radiation scientist Clarence Loshberg, MD, explained that he and his partner, Eugene Singer, MD, chose slum, quote unquote, patients as radiation subjects because their persons don't have any money and they're black and they're poorly washed. This book will document numerous instances of such shocking frankness on the part of white researchers and physicians when they thought that nobody outside their peer group was listening. Okay. And this woman does have a background in the medical field. Okay. And she said, in course of explaining what constitutes exploitative experimentation, medical apartheid will explain the meaning and nature of informed consent and the differences between therapeutic and non-therapeutic research, and traces the delicate balance between experimental risk and benefit because symbiosis, not complete freedom from harm, is therapeutic goal, a goal that often eludes African Americans. The individual chapters also supply general background on how experimental practices evolved over the periods covered in this book and how laws and institutional review boards now protect volunteers, albeit still imperfectly. And she said it is the medical researchers themselves who have documented the proof of this long, unhappy history of the so-called African American, which we know is truly the Negro American Indian, okay, as research subjects. Even so, this history has been a challenge to document because it has been hidden in plain sight, widely scattered, distorted, and rendered all but unrecognizable as abuse by heavy editorialization. As I recall the years I spent threading out these experiments bit by bit, examining their patterns and probing the mindsets that they revealed, I am put in mind of the legal discovery process. A favorite ploy is to provide the opposing side with all the information it seeks, buried in towering mountains of unrelated or tangibly related documents. Similarly, I had perused dusty antebellum medical documents or journals, the Surgeon General's Index as a successor, the Midline Database of Physicians' Memoirs and Literacy Efforts, slave narratives, quote unquote, we weren't slaves, we're prisoners of war, and painfully picked my way through foreign publications in alien tongues that are sometimes more forthcoming than the domestic publications about the history of our medical treatment of minority groups. And that's true. Mining the bright, but then thin loads within these resources, I gradually amassed a cache of evidence. as previously hidden experimental exploits come to light, some have challenged the characterizations of such research as secret, noting the reports were published in the medical and scientific journals that could be read by anyone. But these critics would do well to weigh Marcel Pagan's definition of secrecy. A secret is not something unrevealed, but told privately in a whisper. Until the past few decades, descriptions in medical publications of experimentation with American Indians were shielded from the eyes of the uninitiated. Generalized professional journals such as the Journal of the American Medical Association and the New England Journal of Medicine are not available in bookstores or on newsstands. Specialized medical journals are even less accessible, and access was even more restricted in past decades. The medical libraries that house these journals have historically been closed to the public, and most remain so. Indeed, I have been challenged while entering such libraries while a student or instructor at various northern universities. Moreover, physical access to such journals would constitute only the first hurdle. The medical jargon in which such research papers are couched is often impenetrable even to well-educated non-medical people. But some of the people central to medical research have been more generous with their knowledge. Scores of researchers, physicians, and research subjects have shared their time and expertise and added depth to my understanding of cultural divergence that has fed this history. Often they told me more than they realized. For example, duality persisted as I learned from more than the facts of scientific, questionable, and ethically troubled medical research. Whether we are discussing the etiology of tuberculosis or gynecological surgery or the implication of census health statistics, these sources have conveyed to me by Washi-like divergent medical worldviews. The overarching presence of two Americas, one healthy and white and the other filled with sick, disaffected people of color, has haunted our discussions. Scientists who abuse, exploit, and lie to research subjects get more than their share of ink. But I spent enough time among physician scientists to believe that most American researchers, white and black, are idealistic and skilled. However, when it comes to the abuse of American Indians, a different set of ethical standards has long prevailed, and abusive researchers have historically been closer to the norm than we would like to think. Conventional wisdom pins experimental abuses on Dr. Frankenstein stereotype. Okay. So then basically she says, where she was talking about one of her favorite physicians, someone that she looked up to and was well respected and knew her. She actually found out that this person was guilty of doing the same shit and saying some foul stuff. And I'm just breaking that down to you because I'm going to jump off here. But, she said where she was doing where she was working at a hospital as an administrator, she had to go into the file room and some years later she had opened a drawer and lost the remains of her innocence. She said, I was running a modest poison control center. Sorry, it wasn't a hospital, it was a poison control center in a teaching hospital. Well, it was a teaching hospital in upstate New York. And we poor toxicologic relations had expanded into a space that we had been reluctantly yielded as us by radiology, a real medical department. When I opened a drawer of a file cabinet that had been left behind, a few forgotten medical folders from the 1970s littered the bottom of the file cabinet. One contained the file of an older gentleman in imminent kidney failure and focused upon documenting the reams of tests and assessments entailed in finding him a matching kidney for transplant. The social history stressed his loving family and determination to live. But there was another file in there also described the plight of an older man in kidney failure, but looked different. The file was thinner. The first page I read documented his odyssey into sickness as his kidneys failed. It noted, among other things, that he was a retired insured Negro, which is American Indian. Nearly every page recorded his race, and someone had underlined it on a social profile. Just above the line that indicated that the medical staff's plans for him were not to secure a transplant, but to help him to prepare for his imminent demise. See, that type of shit is what just really infuriates me. But it still goes on to this day, and most people will just want to sweep it under the rug. My light-skinned brothers and sisters, it's not your story to tell. It's ours. It's ours. You would do well to just not say anything. Literally, don't say anything. I'm not being hateful. I'm just keeping it 100. I'm saying it in love. It was signed by a kind physician I knew and admired and who had actively encouraged my interest in medicine. I could not reconcile this signature with the man I knew and a sensitive scholar and devout Christian. Probably I thought I was jumping to conclusions and the patient's race had nothing to do with his failure to be considered for a life-saving organ. While I haltingly voiced my fears to an African-American acquaintance who I work with as a ward clerk in the nephrology unit, she looked at me as if I were not too bright and minced no words. Girl, black people don't get organs. They give organs. And I know someone personally who used to do that shit years ago. Put a roofie in your fucking drink, set your ass up in a club. Next thing you know, you waking up in a bathtub and you're waking up in a bathtub full of ice because your kidney is gone. I know someone. That person's no longer in the land of living. That person is deceased now, right? But I'm simply saying I know someone who did that shit. Yeah, this is highly disturbing. It is. But it needs to be talked about. So basically, she said, during our ensuing debate, she and her coworker, she pointed out to me that the race bias in the hospital where we worked should have resolved any doubts in the early In the early 1980s, most of its black employees worked in housekeeping and clerical support. Blacks were noticeably scarce among the administrative and medical staffs. Why, she asked, was I naive enough to believe racial bias stopped at the staffing roster? This was hardly proof, but my discomfort grew as she categorized instance after instance of overt bias and finally declared, I would never have a procedure done here. I've seen too much. To them, if you're black and poor, you're nothing but a guinea pig. I realized that my discomfort with her words went beyond the truth or falsity of her allegations. The mere fact that she believed them was unsettling because she had worked in a hospital setting and was presumably better informed than most. Yet she did not trust the medical system and seemed less likely to turn to it when ill. The perception of evil in such cases, I realized, can prove damaging and malfeasance itself. I finally glimpsed the understanding the true extent of unethical medical research with so-called American Indians was more than idle curiosity or an academic exercise. It was key to removing barriers between American Indians and the bounty of the American healthcare system. In history's medical library, I discovered a new genre of physician confessional literature, one that described black patients not in Africa, but here in the United States. Unlike the African book-length exploits, these often consisted of a revealing passage or two in an autobiography, a few pages in a memoir, or a hoary article in the 19th century medical journal. I recognized in these Western accounts of black American patients the very same stereotypes belabored in African accounts. References in American physician memoirs and journals articles were studied with telling vignettes and observations of their black patients. The stories physicians told mixed stereotype comedy with exasperation as they dismissed blacks as disease-ridden, unintelligent, fearful, distrustful, and above all, non-compliant patients. By non-compliant, doctors meant patients who could not be trusted to follow medical advice or even to act intelligently in their own best medical interests. I realized that such negative presumptions hampered physicians' ability to care for black patients or even to see them as worthy of the same excellent care rendered to others. I'm going to stop it right there because I'm going to say this. I knew earlier on when I was pregnant, and I know there's some people that made some comments about that. I was a young mother, first year in college, that I got pregnant. And I knew just based on common sense, I've always been a book reader, right? And I've always known that you have to be an advocate for your health. I've known that earlier on in life, especially once I went through the death that I had and then me coming back after the vaccine, right? I knew that I had to take my my own health into my hands, right? So when I got pregnant, back then in the 80s, they would say, oh, just go to your family doctor and get a test, right? I knew straight up off the bat, I needed to go to a gynecologist. I wasn't going to go to a family doctor. I went to the hospital because I had got sick. And, I really thought that I had the flu. I was taking NyQuil, and long story short, I was drugging myself up and I wasn't getting any better, but I was dehydrated by the time I got to the hospital. And went to the hospital, got the test, and found out, oh, no, you've not sick. You've got something else that you're not going to be able to get rid of for until 9 months. I was like, what? 9 months? Oh, no. Yeah. So long story short, I already knew that I needed to go to a gynecologist. I mean, I don't know. I've always had that common sense factor, the gumption to research and to always be inquisitive and to always ask questions and to always be a critical thinker. So I immediately went out and went to the library and got books on pregnancy and labor and all kinds of stuff. And I was just like, oh my God, I've got to go through this whole thing, this whole process. But I mean, I was intelligent enough to go to a doctor, and the doctor was a person of color, melanated, and so happened to be my cousin's uncle. So he delivered my first son, and not going to get into too much personal stuff, but I will just say this. The night that my water broke was on Easter. I didn't have him until 2 days later. And the night that my water broke and I went into labor and they thought I was going to have him, he was at a Luther Vandross concert in the front row. And he got a page. He had to get up. So he came to the hospital in his long ass, expensive ass fur coat, cowboy hat, beautiful leather pants, nice ass cowboy boots. He was just like dudded up. And he said to me, you would have to go into labor tonight, wouldn't you? At my concert. So, yay, surprise. Alex made a grand entrance 2 days later, but I went into labor and broke my water on Easter. And I thought I was going to have him on Easter Sunday, but I didn't. That's my eldest son. So, again, quote unquote, stereotype, teenage pregnancy, so-called melanated inner city, people will say a lot of things, and I was always dubbed to be the one that would not be successful. And I would be in the projects with 20 kids, 50 baby daddies. And I would be on social services and welfare for the rest of my life. And that's what some of the family members thought of me at that time. Yeah, they did. And guess what? I turned out to be the complete opposite. Joke's on y'all. Rest in power, you all, the ones that thought that of me. But my point is, sometimes your family can be your own worst enemy, right? I'm just saying. And people outside the family, they always thought negative things, but I proved them all wrong, and I'm better for it, right? But my point is, people will say, oh, well, you're a typical stereotype. You're a young, quote unquote, black teenage girl. I was 19 and you're going to have a baby. You're not married. Guess what? I had 3 beautiful children and gained 2 more from my second marriage. So my thing is that you got to watch what you say to people, because some people will internalize that shit and turn out to be the very thing that you proclaim them to be. And then people like me will turn that shit around and use it for fuel and turn out to throw that shit right back in your face. And you end up being, I'm not going to say envious or jealous, but you end up with egg on your face. So you got to be careful how you tread on people and what you say to people, right? So my point is, I wanted to share this with you guys tonight. I am going to read more chapters on this book, but I don't want to make this video too long. They're really tripping about uploading videos now over on Facebook. So I have to record this, upload it to YouTube, and then, share it in all the other platforms. But, again, it's no hate towards my light-skinned brothers and sisters, because I love all peoples. And as I've said before, I have so many pale-skinned people in my family. It's not even funny. All of my brother-in-laws practically. Do I have any brother-in-laws that are melanated? No, I don't. No, I don't. I didn't think about that. Do I have them? I don't. So I don't hate other races. I don't loathe. But I know that there comes a time where you have to step back and you have to let us do what we need to do and say what we have to say. And respectfully, stay in your lane and just go, yeah, acknowledge the fact that, yeah, this has been done and still being done. But if we don't come together and we don't learn the true history of what's going on and stop sugarcoating shit, we'll never progress and we'll never grow as a species, right? Consciously, we're at a standstill, I do believe. People say, oh, we're growing in conscious, we're growing in love and light. No, shit's not all love and light. And I told you, there was many bloodshed that happened hundreds, if not thousands of years ago. The same shit's going to happen again, you guys. They're pressing for World War III. We got these war machines that want to be fed the blood. As I told you, these other entities and other species are running amok on this planet, and they're overseeing everything. The custodians are overseeing what's going on right now. And that's what they want. They want the numbers from 8.2 billion to 500 million. And the majority of them, at this point, I probably say they probably don't care what color it is. They just want 500 million. Though it probably would be better for the light skins than it does for the dark skins, right? I'm just simply saying it's right there, and it's so obvious, and we have to have these difficult conversations, you guys. When I read the N-word just a minute ago in this book, I had a friend, or I'm not going to say a friend, a boy that I went to school with. I had a crush on him too, though. He had blonde hair and blue eyes. His name was Wesley. Wesley ended up dying, and he had cancer. And this was in the 3rd grade. All right. Do you not know he spit in my face and called me a nigger? I had a crush on him before he did that. After that, I was done with him. I actually punched him in his face, and then I had to go to the principal's office, and I explained to him why I punched him in his face and why he spit in me and all this stuff. His mom came to school, and she sat down with the teacher and the principal and myself, and my family came in, to talk to her. And ultimately, she had Wesley apologize to me, But again, he called me a nigger. And, we've been taught to hate that word, and it's derogatory, and you should never say it, especially if you're light skin or pale skin. But the thing is, when you call us a nigger, you need to understand that word comes from the Digger Indians, Digger. Those were the Indians that met your ancestors off them boats, and they were slitting your throats and throwing you in a grave. They would literally dig a grave and throw you in it. That's where they say 1 little, 2 little, 3 little Indians, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 little niggas. That's what they call them, because there were so many of us that were slitting throats and killing you when you get out the boat. So I'm not saying that to be mean or hateful. I'm just educating you. You need to go look that shit up. You need to go research it. Don't take my word for it. Research it for yourselves. So when you call somebody a nigger, you need to understand you call somebody an executioner. Seriously. So what are we doing here? I mean, literally, the history you've been taught is not the truth. And I know it's uncomfortable for most of you who will see this video, and you probably won't finish it. I'm just simply saying in love that we got to be critical thinkers, and you got to understand what this place is. I keep telling y'all, I keep saying it over and over again. We're learning the history. I'm explaining certain things to you, certain people I point out, videos I share. You do the research. You will form your own opinion of what this is. And I'm going to tell you, it's not what you think it is. And the only way to escape or to break free is to ascend. You have to go within. The kingdom of heaven is within you. You have to turn that power inwardly, right? I'm just saying. So I appreciate you guys joining me tonight. This was difficult to discuss. I know I probably covered a lot of just little things. And, my whole point is I'm sharing information with you all to make you think, and to hopefully have someone to go pick up this book and read it for yourself. Until we learn from the past and the history, we will continue to make the same mistakes over and over again. And it's only going to get worse. Each reset that they have for humanity, it's worse and worse and worse. And again, we all do need to come together no matter what color you are. And I'm saying that in love because they're trying to kill all of us at this point. It don't matter if you're pale skin or if you're dark skin. It don't matter. They don't want any of us around, literally. They want very few, and they want the ones they can control that are NPCs. That's my point. So anyway, thank you guys for joining me. And remember what I always say, be the change you want to see all around this earth dome, because it's up to you and I to make a positive change. I mean, it starts with us. Pointing fingers at everybody else. You're learning the history, you understand that? But it starts with us. We got to come together and we got to clear the cup. We got to clean the muck out. We got to unprogram our minds and pull those blinders off. And, you know, I'm thankful that my great-grandfather was pale skinned. I mean, you know, I wouldn't be here right now. My mother wouldn't have never been born, right? So, you know, my great-grandfather, my great-great-grandfather, I mean, they were pale skinned on one side of the family. So, I mean, I have no hate for, you know, pale skins. I don't. I mean, I love all people. But the fact is, it's got to stop. You know, got to pump the brakes. And it's going to take more than a few pale skins to stand up and say, hey, this isn't right. You know, and I'm not talking about these Karens. No, I'm talking about the men. I'm talking about the men who stand up and voice the unpopular truth or voice their unpopular opinion amongst the other light skin or white brotherhood, right? That's what I'm saying. It's going to take you all too, not just the female. It's going to take the men too. So at the end, when we exit the bodies, these are just vessels. And we got to understand we've got to grow in love and we've got to reconnect with the entire planet needs to come together. Will it ever do? I don't know. But it would take, what, 60% to do it? 40%? 60% to wake up and realize what this is and just stop with the madness? So anyway, I hope you guys have a great night. Thanks for joining me and I'll talk to you soon.